Welcome back to Should I Stay or Should I Go? And today we're going to talk about the thing that is often the centerpiece of every household's conversation when they're talking about divorce, and that is the house. And I have my co-host with me, Allison, and I'm going to let her kick it off because she has some really interesting thoughts on this. And we're going to talk about like the personal, emotional aspects of it, the financial aspects of it, and some of the pitfalls of it. So, Allison, I'm going to let you kind of take it away.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So today we're going to talk about your house. Do you really want the house? And here's the problem. The house where you live is security. It's security for you. It's security for your children. If you're contemplating divorce, everything's going to be up in the air. What are we searching for? We're searching for that place that we can go to ground and be secure and know that we're safe. And we feel like we're providing that safety. And what I want to have you think about today is think about your house unemotionally. Because the reality is, within my client base, probably 50% of my clients within 2 years after their divorce is finalized are talking about or already have sold the house. Now, you fought tooth and nail to keep that house. You fought tooth and nail to get what you did out of that divorce decree. And next week, we're going to talk about this more in depth, but the value of certain assets, some are greater than others. You fought tooth and nail for that house, and that equity in that house that you end up with, and then those payments that you're going to be making may not end up having been the best deal for you. Elizabeth is going to talk about some of the financial ramifications of being responsible for that mortgage or needing to refinance it. But emotionally, let's talk about that. What happens 2 years after the divorce that changes people being in that house and not wanting to be there anymore?
So
One of the
what are some of those things that changes or that you've seen with your clients?
well, the first thing is with that house comes the house payment, all the maintenance, the yard, if it has a pool. What about, does the roof need to be repaired? What about keeping the outside painted every so many years? A house comes with continual upkeep. And for a lot of us, we think, oh, I can do that and I'll be happy to. But once life gets on a roll and gets settled and the kids have their activities and you've gone to work or gone back, gotten dug back into your job and you're working, you may not have the time you thought you were going to do the yard and to take care of all the maintenance that goes along with owning a house. But more importantly, what comes with it is the ghost of husbands past. I've had a lot of my clients tell me that after so much time, they can redecorate here and they can spruce up and they can make it their own. But most of us, can we afford to go in and do a complete overhaul of our houses? Not after a divorce, we can't. And so we're stuck with so many reminders of the life we used to live versus the life we want to be living now and going forward. And so a lot of women look at it at some point unemotionally and realize that what they gained in keeping the house in security doesn't balance with the obligation and the expense. And quite frankly, that desire to start that new life fresh in a new place, maybe a smaller house, especially if your kids are teenagers and older going off to college. You don't need that big house anymore. So it's about thinking about the house not from the emotional, it's my home, it's my happy place, it's where I'm safe, but think about it outside of what it means to you as your home. It's an asset, it's a tangible thing that needs a lot of upkeep and is an biggest part of your budget.
I've seen a lot of women do exactly what you just described. And, I feel like when I'm watching this play out, like they're really digging their heels in and doubling down. They want the house, period. End of story. It doesn't matter what it costs, what they have to do, because they honestly don't think about it realistically, but they just want the house. And I recall one of my clients, this was years ago, and she had kids that were, I want to say middle school age, and she ended up not getting the house. And so she bought a house, and it was a good bit smaller. And initially, she was, kind of down in the dumps because her lifestyle was changing. She didn't have, all the bells and whistles and all the fancy stuff, and she's going to be in this smaller home. And then later she told me how wonderful it was because her kids were getting to that age where they were spending more time with friends. So now that she has this smaller house and when the kids are home, she felt like they were closer to her. Like they actually were sitting at the kitchen table and eating dinner together, and they were in the family room watching TV together because they didn't have like the media room and the game room and all this stuff. And then I have another friend who her children are grown, but she bought another house. And now she constantly talks about how she just can't keep it up. It's too much work and she wants a townhouse. So it is interesting how, once we shift gears and we get in that new rhythm of that new life, how we see things differently and we experience them differently than what we had maybe thought.
And it's perfectly normal for that house to be your place of security and safety because it's ownership. You're there, you've been there, it's all your stuff, and it does feel safe. But at the end of the day, that little bit of safety is far outweighed by the obligations of taking care of that house. Like you said, the kids may not be there as they get older. They're not going to be in that house. As they get older, the schools are going to be further and further away. They're not right there in the neighborhood. And now you've got that, obligation of being there and taking care of everything. And for me, it's that fresh start. It's that opportunity to come home and say, this is mine. And as long as it still has those ghosts of husbands past in it, it doesn't quite feel like mine. Whereas getting that new house that might be more effective with your budget, it might be more efficient with your time. It might even be better located if your kids, like you said, are going to junior high or high school. If the high school or junior high is on the other side of the county or the school district, to be able to be closer to that. And those are considerations that don't replace that security and safety of being in the home that you're in, but they do lend themselves to helping you start that new life. I mean, you're going through all of this. If you're going to do it, don't you want to come out of it having started that new life and built what you wanted and something that was fun for you?
I think that's such a good point. And I think often when we hold on to the house, we're holding on to everything in the house, all the memories. So you can't, it's hard to move on. Whether it's a divorce or any kind of breakup, if you aren't truly moving like forward, but instead you're looking over your shoulder at what was. So like we're coming up on the holidays. And if you had, like Thanksgiving, some traditional Thanksgiving thing, and now you're in the house and that other person isn't, and maybe half of that family's gone because maybe his parents came or his siblings or something. And so now you have a new experience to create, but you're creating it in the same space that you had all those other memories. And so then it doesn't feel right. It feels weird. It's uncomfortable. It's awkward, as opposed to a new home and everything is new. And you get to start fresh, create new memories without being haunted by those other memories. I can't hear you, Allison. You're muted.
So, Elizabeth, I've got a question for you. We're
Okay.
talking about haunting. So, what do women need to know should they get the house? If they have to take a mortgage in their name, what is that going to mean for them? Refinancing the mortgage, what do they need to know? What numbers do they need to know? How does that work?
Well, there's so many moving parts to it and so many things that can come up in the process. So in order to, regardless of how the house is currently titled, who's got the mortgage and so forth, if you're going to keep the house, then the ex-husband is his attorney is going to make sure that there's language in the divorce decree that says you have a certain amount of time to refinance it into your own name. And then that ugly clause that comes after that is that, and if you don't clause, generally states that it will be a forced sale. So and a lot of times I see the decrees be written so that it's done in 90 days. And if I have the opportunity to talk to people early enough in the process, I will coach them on speaking to their attorney and having that attorney, relay, but build in more time. And the reason being is if they're not going to go ahead and get pre-approved and make sure they can qualify, then they don't really know whether or not they can do it. So I always tell them, you've got to do that first. But we've got to look at your income, make sure you qualify, make sure your credit is okay. You never know if you've had some collection account hit that you didn't even realize you missed it. And now it's, taking your credit down. So you've got to make sure your credit is in good shape and get pre-qualified. And in that pre-qualification process, the biggest thing is your income. If you have not worked outside the home, and you don't have an income, yes, we can use child support once you receive it, but there's a timeline there. You've got to receive it for a certain amount of time. You've got to prove receipt of it in order for you to qualify. So hence the reason why you may need more than 90 days. And it depends on what type of loan program, but you're going to need either 3 months or 6 months proof of receipt of child support if you need that income to qualify. You're also going to need, if you haven't been working, you're going to need that much time for your job to show that income. And now there's other things that can be done, like if there's a lump sum payout, if you structure that in a trust, and the trust is going to make you payments, then you only need one of those and we can move on down the road. There's just got to be enough money in that trust for a continuance. Same thing with child support continuance. If your child is 16 or 17, that child support doesn't count because it's not going to continue for 3 years. So there's so many moving parts. And I always tell people, if you truly want the house, we have to start well before your divorce is final to make sure to lay the groundwork and make sure that you can actually qualify for the house, and then let you see what is that cost going to look like, because you may decide that you don't want it. Some people, that will be their tipping point of keeping the house or not keeping the house, is seeing it, all the numbers. But I really think it's so critical to do that homework before you're divorced, while you're in the process, but before you're divorced, before you commit to that in that divorce decree. Because what if you can't do it? And I've had many, many women come to me after their divorce. I didn't even know they were going through a divorce. They come to me afterwards and they're like, okay, I got to hurry up and refinance my house. I got 60 days. I got 90 days. I got to get this done. And I go pull their credit and I'm like, you can't get a mortgage, or you don't have the income. And the way the decree was structured and what you get and what you earn on your job, we can't use all of this. And then I'll have them inevitably say, but I got a lump sum. I got all this money in the bank. It's like, okay, well, it's not structured in such a fashion that we can take an income from it. So it doesn't matter. I don't care how much money you got in the bank. You don't have income. And that's probably the biggest thing that gets people, whether they're going through a divorce or not. They think, I've got all this money, but no income. Give me a loan. It's like, you have to have income. So that's the biggest hurdle that I see.
Well, Elizabeth, in today's interest rates environment, is this something that women should get involved in figuring out if they can qualify for a loan today at today's interest rates versus maybe, looking at what the house payment was? Say you have a, common house and a standard value house and your payments are $2,000 a month and you think I can afford that, not taking into consideration that that house was purchased 5 years ago when interest rates were very low. And now that they're going up, how does that increase in interest rates affect what's going to happen when a woman goes to refinance a house?
Well, it erodes it erodes the opportunity or the ability, because when you're looking at, obviously it depends on what they financed at originally, but if they were in the threes, you're looking at almost double a payment, and well, not double, but certainly double on the interest, and the interest makes up the biggest component of your mortgage payment. If you're, even if you were in the fives, high fours, low fives, it's still going to be quite a jump. So yeah, that $2,000 a month payment is not going to be around. I'll give you like a little snapshot. So recently looked at a 350 price point for a client of mine at today's interest rates. And when I put everything in there, taxes and insurance, mortgage insurance, because they were putting just 5% down, their payment was over $3,000. And I don't know why it was this particular client, but it triggered, I guess maybe because it's a not a popular, but it's a price point that I see a lot of. And so it triggered my memory. I'm like, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Let me do it again. I kept doing it because in my mind, I had the payment at the 2,000, 2,100, 2,200 mark, not the 3,000 plus. And I was like, I've made them. And then I had to like, sort of like, oh, wait a minute. That was last year. That's stuck in my memory
Hmm.
banks. That's why I'm thinking that this calculation is correct. So 350 last year, you would have been around 2,000, 2,200. This year, you're looking at probably about 32 to 3,500. Big jump.
Mm,
So if you are
wow.
sitting in that house thinking, oh, I can manage this house payment, can you? Because it's not going to remain the same in today's environment.
Well, now let me ask you a quick question. If the house, let's say, is in both of your names, is there a way to work with your bank to take one person off of that loan and just
There
assume
is
full liability on your own?
there is a way, um, but there's no guarantee. So they can contact the institution and let them know that there's been a divorce and that the house was awarded to one, and the institution can elect whether or not they will drop that person. It's called the Saint Germain, uh, not law, but clause. And I can certainly provide someone that information so they have the right talking points and they can reference the correct statute to have that done. But it's still ultimately up to the lender. And one of the things that I try to help people see, it's like, okay, step into the shoes of being the banker. And let's just say, you got a lot of money and, one of your relatives comes to you and says, me and my wife want to buy a house and we make this much money. Will you loan us the money? And you're like, well, hey, this is a good return on my investment. So yeah, I'd loan you the money. And then a year later, they come back and they go, oh, we're going to split up. And now, her income or his income's going away. It's just going to be half of what we made. How do you feel as an investor? Do you feel a little at risk? Do you feel uncomfortable, or are you totally cool with that? So, and that's how the banks are, it's layers of risk. So when you start adding layers of risk, the investor starts getting a little uneasy with the situation. So it is up to the creditor. There's no guarantees, but it's worth trying.
Hey, everything's worth trying. And if the answer is no, at least you know to ask the question. and not assume, because we know what happens when we assume.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and there's a lot of things. I've got some notes here of some things. One of the questions that comes up is I have temporary orders. So, temporary settlement agreement. So can I just move forward with that? And in that temporary, it says that I'm going to receive X amount in child support, and I need that component in addition to my income to qualify. So can I use it? And the challenge with temporary orders is they're temporary. So you may be awarded $1,000 a month in child support temporarily, but the final order may come out and it's 800. So now you've got a $200 gap. So a lender is not going to want to do anything on a temporary if we're using that for qualifying. Now, if we don't need it for qualifying and you have temporary orders and you just want to say, hey, I'm in the process of getting divorced, so I'm going to be on this all by myself and so forth and so on. Well, that's a different animal. But if you need something from that temporary order in order to qualify, it's not going to help you. However, in that rule that I was mentioning earlier, where we have to have either 3 months or 6 months receipt of child support income, if the spouse is paying it either voluntarily or under a temporary order, and then you eventually have a final order and they keep paying it, and that amount is consistent, and there's a trick to the term consistency, but if it's consistent, then I can use the time during the temporary period plus the after it's done to satisfy that time frame. But here's the trick on continuance or consistency, excuse me. Same time. So if he pays you on the 1st, and then 1 month he pays you on the 6th, and then the next month he's even a little bit later and he pays you on the 15th, that's not consistent. It needs to be like the 1st of the month, the 1st and the 2nd. If it's a couple of days off, that's okay. But if it's sporadic and you're not truly getting it timely, then that is not considered consistent. If it's $1,000 and then 1 month he breaks it into 2 payments, he pays you 500 on the 1st and 500 on the 15th, that's not consistent. If it's $1,000 and 1 month he does something like my ex-husband did, it's like, I got the kids and I had to pay for a babysitter, so I just deducted that from what I'm paying you in child support. So then he writes you a check for 900. That's not consistent either. Even if he wants to produce like the babysitting bills and all that, it's like, sorry, it doesn't work. So you have to be, I guess mindful really is the right word, of these little nuances, and just make sure that you're doing everything in a real consistent, methodical way so that you don't cause any ripples in what you want to do down the road.
Okay. So is there anything else that a person might consider or need to consider whether they want to keep the house or not keep the house before we close out?
I really do think the biggest thing is asking yourself, from taking emotion out of the picture and just trying to put on like a business hat, and ask yourself, is this a smart financial decision for me, or for me and my children, or for me and my household, for me to take on this responsibility to protect the memories or whatever the reason is that you want to stay in the house? Is it really a smart financial decision? Are you going to be house poor? Like some people say, oh, I can do it, I can make those payments. All right, well, what are you going to have to give up? Are you going to have to give up taking your kids for pizza on a Friday night just because spur of the moment you decided to? I mean, what are you going to have to give up to be able to make that payment? How uncomfortable is it going to make you? Are you going to have to give up tucking some money away for their college education? Are you going to have to give up contributing to your 401k? I mean, what are you going to have to give up? if you don't have to give up anything and you can do it comfortably, then by all means, go for it. But think about the true financial ramifications of it, because those will be the things that come into play once the divorce is done, and then you start having regrets or resentment, and you don't want that. And then it's kind of hard to bail out too. It's a lot easier to sell the house with the spouse and divide all that up and financially divide it all up and figure out what are we going to do with the escrow refund, and what are we going to do with this and that, and you just divvy it up and be on your way, then going through a whole process where you buy them out of their equity, and that costs money to do that transaction. And then 6 months down the road, you're like, oh, I really don't want to stay in this house and I can't really afford it. So now you've got to sell the house and you're walking away. You've already paid him. Now you're paying the real estate commissions out of your proceeds because you didn't get to split that with him. So now you're walking away possibly with less money. So there's just so much to consider. So if there's just an inkling of doubt, run the numbers and make sure if you're keeping the house that you're keeping it for the right reasons.
That is a great point, Elizabeth. Thank you. And I just want to remind everybody that whether you keep the house or not, that's certainly what's important to you. And if you financially can, that's up to you. But do yourself the favor. Talk to Elizabeth, someone like Elizabeth, about your options for a loan, what interest rates are, what it's actually going to cost to get that loan, as well as talk to your bank, whoever has that loan, to find out, are you going to be able to keep that loan in your name if you and your husband are on there as joint? Are you going to be able to keep that loan, or is that loan automatically going to go away? And that lender can give you a feel for what they're going to do. And that's some homework you can do in advance of
Yeah.
this.
And there's so many other moving parts to, like, if you're disposing of the house and you're going to sell it, or if you have other properties, so many things you need to know. And we can certainly address those in later calls. But I think right now it's a matter of, does it make sense to keep the house? And that's the first question that you have to ask before you can get into any of the other stuff.
Okay, well, that sounds great.
So Allison,
Well,
tell me, I know
yeah,
that we've got a special guest coming up next week. You want to tell everybody what we've got coming?
yeah, over the last 2 weeks, we've talked about assets, liabilities, now the house, emotional, financial, how do we make that decision? Next week, we're going to have Madeline Hall with Raymond James come and answer some questions that we have about, are all assets equally valued? Are there some that are more important to us down the road? What do we need to know as we go into this contemplation about our financial future? And some tips and some hints that she can give us about things that we need to think about, not only to ensure our security in the future, but that of our children.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a great show. And Madeline she's such a delight to talk to. So I'm looking forward to that as well. So everyone, be sure to like, share, give us a thumbs up, shoot us a comment, ask us questions. We'll be happy to take your questions, and share our channel with anyone that you know that might be contemplating divorce. So until next time, until next week, and join us again with Madeline. We'll see you then.